It was a cold, rainy night in Philadelphia, when a body was discovered beside the banks of the Schuylkill River, its dark waters carrying away whispers of secrets that would soon shake the city. The man, later identified as Edward Eddie Malone, a 38-year-old financial analyst known for his quiet integrity and meticulous nature, was found sprawled on a narrow stretch of concrete near a rarely used pedestrian bridge. His lifeless eyes stared blankly into the storm, and clutched in his hand was a crumpled scrap of paper with a few barely legible words: "Silence breeds ruin." There were no signs of a struggle in the immediate vicinity, yet the deliberate placement of the note hinted at an execution that was both premeditated and meant to send a message. Detective Renee Carter, a veteran of the Philadelphia Police Department with a reputation for leaving no stone unturned, arrived at the scene as the city's neon lights blurred against the relentless drizzle. Standing under a flickering street lamp, she surveyed the area with a practiced gaze. The narrow graffiti-tagged wall behind the bridge and the scattered leaves on the damp pavement suggested that the murderer had chosen this secluded spot with care, a place where few would disturb the quiet even in the dead of night. As forensic teams cordoned off the scene and began collecting evidence, Renee's mind raced through the possibilities. Eddie Malone was known in his modest circle for uncovering discrepancies at his firm, a mid-sized investment company that prided itself on ethical practices. Yet in the weeks before his death, he had grown increasingly troubled, scribbling notes in a battered journal about hidden transfers and unaccounted funds. Over the following morning, as the city reluctantly awakened to the news, Renee started to piece together Eddie's final hours. His colleagues at the firm described him as diligent and soft-spoken, someone who rarely drew attention to himself. But whispers began to circulate that Eddie had been investigating irregularities in the company's financial statements, irregularities that pointed to a complex web of internal corruption. One senior associate recalled that Eddie had mentioned a pattern of redirection in funds that did not add up with the firm's public reports. Though no one had initially suspected foul play, the discovery of his body in such a remote location made it clear that someone had taken drastic measures to keep certain truths from emerging. Renee began her investigation by delving into Eddie's work life. At the investment firm, located in a modest brick building in the heart of the financial district, she interviewed colleagues and scoured his desk for clues. Hidden among his neatly organized files, she found a partially torn document with annotated figures and cryptic notes in Eddie's familiar, precise handwriting. The document referred to a series of transactions involving an offshore account in the Cayman Islands and mentioned a mysterious individual identified only by the initials. This discovery sent a shiver down her spine. Eddie's cautious notes hinted at a conspiracy that stretched far beyond a simple case of embezzlement. In parallel, Renee collected surveillance footage from nearby street cameras and the firm's security system. Grainy images revealed a shadowy figure in a dark overcoat near the building's back entrance late one night, around the time Eddie would have been working late. Although the footage was inconclusive, the man's deliberate, almost rehearsed, gait suggested he was not a random passerby. Further investigation by the department's tech unit uncovered that the same individual had been spotted near a popular downtown diner, an unremarkable establishment frequented by late-shift workers and night owls, on the night of the murder. As the detective followed the digital breadcrumbs, she discovered that Eddie had been in regular contact with someone through encrypted emails. His computer's draft folder contained several unsent messages filled with urgency and coded language. In one such draft he wrote, "If the numbers don't add up, it means they are being siphoned off, and someone is covering it up. I must find MK before it's too late." Renee's suspicions grew. Eddie's investigation into financial misdeeds was on the verge of exposing a major scandal, and someone with power had decided to silence him permanently. Detective Carter then turned her attention to Eddie's personal life. A quiet man with few close friends, Eddie's only known confidant was his younger sister, Lisa Malone. In a tearful interview at her modest South Philadelphia apartment, Lisa recalled how Eddie had become increasingly anxious over the past few months. "He kept saying that things at work weren't right," she whispered. "He was worried about money disappearing and people in high places doing things behind closed doors. I never thought it would come to this." Her grief was mixed with a palpable sense of foreboding. Lisa mentioned that Eddie had once hinted that he was being followed, though he brushed it off as paranoia. Now, in the light of his murder, those words resonated with tragic clarity. As Renee's investigation deepened, she uncovered links between Eddie's findings and several high-ranking officials at the investment firm. Internal auditors had long noted discrepancies in the company's books, sums that were funneled into shell companies and disguised as legitimate business expenses. One particular audit report from a year earlier had been mysteriously shelved without explanation, and a whistleblower within the firm had hinted that powerful individuals were at play. Renee obtained a copy of the report through a Freedom of Information Act request, and its damning evidence pointed to a deliberate scheme of misappropriation of funds. The report mentioned irregular payments to a firm based in the Cayman Islands, which, when cross-referenced with Eddie's annotations, confirmed that the same offshore account was involved. A breakthrough came when forensic accountants working on the case managed to trace a series of electronic funds transfers. These transfers, which appeared innocuous at first glance, revealed a hidden pattern. Large sums were being moved periodically to accounts in tax havens. The transfers were dated on the 15th of each month, a regularity that suggested a scheduled operation rather than random errors. Among the records was a cryptic memo, signed MK, a signature that matched the initials from Eddie's notes. Renee's team began to focus on identifying MK and his possible connection to the firm's corruption. The trail led them to a former executive, Michael Keller, who had left the company under a cloud of controversy 2 years prior. Keller had a reputation for being both brilliant and ruthless, and his departure had been quietly covered up by the board. When questioned, Keller initially denied any involvement, but under intense interrogation he offered vague admissions about being part of a restructuring process. His evasiveness and the fact that his initials matched MK made him a prime suspect in Eddie's murder. Meanwhile, Detective Carter also pursued leads in the financial world. She interviewed a prominent forensic accountant, Dr. Samuel Ortiz, who explained that the pattern of transfers was characteristic of a well-organized scheme designed to divert funds with minimal detection. Ortiz noted that the use of offshore accounts and shell companies was a tactic favored by sophisticated criminal networks and corrupt executives alike. "What we're seeing here isn't a one-off mistake," he asserted in a formal deposition. "It's a systematic redirection of money, a laundering operation that requires the cooperation of multiple parties." His testimony lent further weight to the hypothesis that Eddie's discoveries were on the verge of exposing a large-scale corruption network. As the investigation progressed, Renee began to receive anonymous tips. One message, delivered via an encrypted text message, warned her, "Some truths are too dangerous. Stop before you're next." The message chilled her, but also steeled her resolve. She arranged to meet with an informant known only as Hawk, a former employee of the investment firm who had left under mysterious circumstances. Hawk agreed to meet in a nondescript cafe near Penn's Landing. Over cups of weak coffee in a smoky, dimly lit back room, Hawk revealed that the corruption extended far beyond the firm. "They're using the money to fund political favors," he confided in a low voice. "City contracts, tax breaks, even real estate deals. The board members have more influence than anyone in this city, and if someone finds out what's really happening, they'll do whatever it takes to keep it quiet." Hawk's revelations tied the financial irregularities directly to a network of local politicians and business moguls, suggesting that Eddie Malone had unwittingly become a thorn in the side of a powerful cabal. Armed with this new information, Detective Carter collaborated with the Philadelphia District Attorney's Office to secure search warrants for several key locations. In a coordinated operation, law enforcement agents raided the offices of the investment firm, the residences of a few board members, and even a private safe deposit box at a well-known local bank. In the safe deposit box, investigators uncovered stacks of documents and photographs that detailed transactions spanning several years, records that implicated not only the firm, but also several influential local figures. Among the documents was a ledger with entries marked by the initials, RA, reinforcing the connection to Michael Keller. The evidence was damning, and it painted a picture of systematic embezzlement and the ruthless elimination of any threat to the status quo. Despite the mounting evidence, Michael Keller remained elusive. When confronted with the financial records, Keller's publicist claimed he had retired peacefully and was living quietly in the suburbs. However, surveillance footage from a nearby neighborhood showed Keller driving a nondescript sedan late at night, a car that had been registered under an alias. Further digital forensics revealed that Keller had, in recent months, been in contact with individuals known to be involved in white-collar crime. When pressed by Detective Carter, Keller offered little more than a cold, measured denial. "I had nothing to do with any wrongdoing. I simply took part in corporate restructuring as directed." His tone, however, belied a deep-seated defensiveness. As the case moved toward trial, the media caught wind of the scandal. Front-page headlines in the Philadelphia Inquirer and local television news broadcasts turned Eddie Malone's murder into a symbol of corporate corruption and political collusion. Public protests erupted outside the investment firm's headquarters, and city council members demanded a full investigation into the irregularities. The pressure mounted not only on the accused, but also on the local government to act decisively. During a tense public hearing, one councilwoman accused the implicated board members of stealing from the very people they were meant to serve, while a financial analyst testified that the scheme had cost taxpayers millions. In the courtroom, the prosecution laid out its case with painstaking detail. Detective Carter took the stand and recounted her investigation, from the discovery of Eddie's body at the Schuylkill River to the intricate web of financial transactions and anonymous tips that pointed to a high-level conspiracy. Her testimony was bolstered by the forensic accountant's report, the internal audit documents, and the damning ledger signed "Hurrah." The defense, meanwhile, attempted to cast doubt on the evidence, arguing that the irregular transactions could be explained by standard corporate practices in an increasingly globalized market. They portrayed Michael Keller as a scapegoat, an unfortunate casualty of a company undergoing rapid restructuring rather than a mastermind of criminal activity. Yet, as witness after witness recounted their experiences and expert after expert deconstructed the financial records, the case against Keller and the implicated board members grew too compelling to dismiss. In one of the most memorable moments of the trial, a former employee of the investment firm tearfully testified that he had been pressured to fix the books and had witnessed senior officials discuss ensuring silence in hushed tones. The courtroom fell silent as he recounted the fear that permeated the office, a fear that cost an honest man his job and ultimately may have contributed to Eddie Malone's fate. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day unveiling more layers of the corruption that had festered within the firm and its political allies. For Detective Carter, each new piece of testimony was a bittersweet vindication, proof that Eddie's final investigation had not been in vain, even as it left a trail of shattered lives. On the last day of the trial, as the jury filed back into the courtroom, the atmosphere was tense with anticipation. The verdict, when it finally came, was a mixture of triumph and unresolved sorrow. Several of the mid-level executives and lobbyists were found guilty, while the charges against the top-tier board members were reduced on technicalities. Michael Keller received a lengthy prison sentence for his role in the embezzlement scheme, but the trial left many questions unanswered. After the courtroom proceedings ended, Detective Carter returned to the Schuylkill River, standing at the very spot where Eddie Malone's body had been found. The water flowed silently past her, carrying with it the memories of a case that had exposed the dark underbelly of corporate greed and political collusion. In that moment, she reflected on the fact that justice, though achieved in part, was never an absolute state. The corruption that had led to Eddie's murder was deeply entrenched, woven into the fabric of the city's financial and political institutions. The case had changed her, a constant reminder that the pursuit of truth is a lifelong battle, one that leaves scars but also fuels an unyielding resolve. In the months that followed, the scandal led to sweeping reforms. The investment firm was forced to undergo a full audit, and new laws were enacted to increase transparency in corporate financial practices. City officials launched a series of initiatives aimed at rooting out corruption in public contracts, and investigative journalism in Philadelphia received a renewed boost from donors determined to support the work of uncovering hidden truths. Yet, for many who had followed the case closely, the story remained open-ended. a reminder that in the labyrinth of high finance and political influence, some corridors remain dark. Detective Carter continued her career with a quiet determination, aware that each solved case only unveiled new mysteries. Late at night, as she reviewed old files in her modest apartment overlooking a busy Philadelphia street, she would often think of Eddie Malone, the gentle soul who had dared to challenge powerful forces and paid the ultimate price for his integrity. The case was cited in police training sessions as a lesson in perseverance and moral courage, and his story was memorialized in a small plaque at the firm's former headquarters. Even as time passed, whispers of the unresolved threads persisted. An encrypted email found on Eddie's laptop had referenced a meeting scheduled for early January at a well-known financial district restaurant. Though the investigation into that lead never produced a clear suspect, it served as a constant reminder that the network of corruption might still be active, albeit in a more covert form. Some former colleagues later hinted that Eddie had been close to exposing more than just financial mismanagement, that he might have uncovered evidence of collusion between certain political figures and criminal enterprises. For Detective Carter, those unanswered questions were both a source of frustration and motivation. They spurred her to maintain a vigilant watch over the evolving landscape of corporate and political power in Philadelphia. Public sentiment in the city became increasingly polarized. While many celebrated the partial successes of the investigation and the subsequent reforms, others feared that the deep-rooted corruption was merely adapting, finding new avenues to persist beyond the reach of law enforcement. Community meetings and local radio talk shows buzzed with debates about the balance between economic growth and ethical governance, and civic activists rallied for more robust oversight of public institutions. For the average citizen of Philadelphia, the case of Eddie Malone became more than just a headline. It became a symbol of the ongoing struggle for accountability in an age where money and influence often eclipsed the truth. In her later years, Detective Renee Carter would occasionally return to that quiet stretch by the Schuylkill River. As she walked along the embankment, the soft murmur of the water a constant companion, she would recall the case with a mixture of pride and lingering sorrow. The memory of Eddie's determined eyes, the frantic scribblings in his journal, and the final, cryptic message he left behind remained etched in her mind. It was a reminder that the pursuit of justice was not always marked by tidy conclusions, but by a relentless commitment to uncovering the layers of truth, even when they revealed uncomfortable realities. There was no grand epilogue to the case, a neat conclusive ending that tied up every loose end. Instead, the investigation left behind a mosaic of fragments, court documents, media reports, reform initiatives, and quiet conversations among those who remembered Eddie Malone's bravery. The unresolved identity of the shadowy figures mentioned in his final notes, the faint digital traces that hinted at ongoing illicit transfers, and the enduring whispers of silence fees all served as a reminder that in a world dominated by power and money, the truth was a moving target. For many in Philadelphia, the case of Eddie Malone became a cautionary tale, a story that was retold in coffee shops, community centers, and even on late-night television. It underscored the reality that beneath the polished veneer of high finance and political influence lay a network of deceit that could be dismantled only piece by piece, and that every victory in the fight for transparency was hard-won. Detective Carter's own journey was far from over. Though she had achieved a measure of success in exposing the corruption that had cost Eddie his life, she remained ever mindful of the fact that every solved mystery in the labyrinth of crime led to new questions. In her quiet moments, when the city's relentless energy softened into the low hum of suburban nights, she would reread Eddie's final journal entries, those desperate unsent messages that spoke of a truth too dangerous for the world. They were a constant source of both comfort and challenge, a reminder that while some battles might be won, the war against corruption was perpetual. As Philadelphia moved forward, its skyline punctuated by historic landmarks, its streets alive with the pulse of everyday life, the legacy of Eddie Malone's case endured. It was not a neatly tied conclusion, but rather an ongoing narrative, one that influenced policy debates, inspired new generations of investigative journalists, and reinforced the determination of law enforcement to keep a watchful eye on those who wielded power. In community forums and local universities, the case was dissected and discussed, a living lesson in the complexities of truth, justice, and the human cost of silence. In the end, the story of Eddie Malone was not confined to a single trial or a series of headlines. It became part of the fabric of Philadelphia's collective memory, a city that had learned to celebrate its resilience while never forgetting the sacrifices made in the name of accountability. Detective Renee Carter, though weathered by years of relentless pursuit, continued to work each day with the understanding that even in a world where corruption cast long shadows, the light of truth was a flame that could be nurtured, no matter how small. And so, as another November wind swept through the city and the Schuylkill River continued its quiet journey past familiar bridges and worn pathways, the legacy of that fateful night lived on. It was woven into the everyday conversations of citizens, the cautious optimism of reform-minded officials, and the unyielding resolve of those who, like Eddie Malone, had dared to challenge a system built on secrets. In the shifting mosaic of Philadelphia's urban life, the case remained an enduring call to vigilance, a reminder that in the eternal struggle between light and darkness, every uncovered truth, however fragmentary, was a step toward a more honest future. Late on a humid summer evening in a bustling urban neighborhood, urban harvest market's fluorescent lights bathed its aisles in a clinical glow. The store, a favorite local haunt with its well-organized displays of fresh produce and neatly stacked cans, had long been a symbol of neighborhood stability. Shoppers moved predictably through the narrow corridors, exchanging brief nods with familiar faces as they filled their carts with everyday necessities. No one could have foreseen that on this seemingly ordinary night, a single inexplicable act would shatter that sense of routine and unravel a mystery whose tendrils reached far beyond the market's automatic doors. At precisely 9:13 p.m., as the store's managers began preparing to close, a piercing scream disrupted the quiet hum of the refrigeration units. An employee in the bakery section, Marlene, whose gentle smile and steady hands were well known among regular customers, had stumbled upon a scene that froze her in terror. In a back storage room, tucked away behind rows of surplus goods, lay the lifeless body of Devin Carter, the market's trusted assistant manager. His eyes, wide with an expression of shock, were fixed on the ceiling as though pleading silently for help. A thin layer of blood had begun to congeal on the concrete floor beneath him, and clutched tightly in his grasp was a crumpled scrap of paper. The note's message, scrawled hastily in dark ink, read, "When silence falls, the truth won't last." The discovery sent shockwaves through urban harvest market. Within minutes, uniformed officers arrived, and the store was cordoned off. Detective Simone Alvarez, a dedicated investigator known for her relentless attention to detail, took charge of the scene. As she stepped into the dim, musty room where Devin's body lay, she noted immediately the eerie precision of the setup. There was no sign of a struggle, no overturned boxes, no scattered merchandise. Everything appeared unnaturally calm, almost as if the killer had taken painstaking care to stage the scene. The note, the position of the body, even the subtle puddles of blood, each detail whispered that this was not a random act of violence, but a premeditated execution meant to send a message. Over the next few hours, Detective Alvarez began interviewing the few employees who had been working that night. Marlene, still trembling from the shock of her discovery, recalled that Devin had been unusually anxious during his shift. "He was checking the registers more than usual," she said softly, eyes downcast. "He even asked if we had any discrepancies in the end-of-day reports. I thought he was just being extra careful, but now," her voice trailed off, haunted by the image of Devin's vacant stare. Other employees mentioned that Devin had recently stayed late, poring over financial documents in a small office behind the main aisle, a detail that now took on a more sinister cast. As Detective Alvarez reviewed Devin's personnel file and searched his cubby near the office, she discovered a small notebook with pages filled in neat looping handwriting. Among routine notes about stock and scheduling, there were entries that hinted at irregularities in the store's finances. In one entry dated just 3 weeks earlier, Devin had written, "Numbers don't add up. Something is off with the monthly transfers. Must verify. Another page bore a list of amounts with discrepancies that Devon had circled repeatedly, as if trying to highlight an issue he feared might otherwise go unnoticed. It was evident that Devon had been investigating something that, if exposed, could jeopardize not only his job but also the integrity of the entire store. Urban Harvest Market was more than just a grocery store to its regulars. It was a community institution. Yet behind its friendly facade lurked a darker reality. Financial records obtained from an internal audit hinted at significant irregularities in the store's accounting. Large sums of money, meant for inventory purchases and operational expenses, had been diverted into unknown accounts. No one had spoken openly about these discrepancies, but whispers among the staff suggested that senior management had been skimming funds, perhaps even laundering money under the guise of routine transactions. Devon, it seemed, had taken it upon himself to follow the trail. His entries in the notebook made clear that he had been on the verge of uncovering something substantial, something that someone might have wanted to keep hidden at any cost. The investigation took a disturbing turn when Detective Alvarez discovered that Devon's computer, still logged into his secure work account, contained a series of encrypted emails. With the help of the department's cyber unit, Alvarez painstakingly decrypted portions of the messages. One email, sent from an anonymous account, warned, "Stop digging, or you'll be silenced forever." Another email mentioned a meeting scheduled for the day before Devon's death, with a subject line that read simply, "Final adjustments." The language was curt and menacing, a digital echo of the handwritten note left on the floor. The more Alvarez delved into these communications, the more it became apparent that Devon's discoveries threatened to expose a significant financial scandal. Investigators soon focused their attention on the store's management. Urban Harvest Market was owned by a mid-sized corporation with deep ties to local suppliers and regional banks. At the helm was Richard Thompson, a shrewd businessman known for his philanthropic gestures in the community, but also rumored to be as ruthless in the boardroom as he was generous at charity events. Richard's public image as a pillar of the community made the allegations all the more explosive. When questioned, he expressed shock at Devon's death and insisted that all financial procedures at the store were in strict accordance with corporate policy. Yet Detective Alvarez's growing dossier of evidence painted a far more complicated picture. A forensic accountant working on the case discovered that between the months of March and August, the store had recorded a series of inexplicable financial transfers. The amounts, though relatively modest compared to the store's overall revenue, were consistent and meticulously timed. Transfers made on the 15th of every month. Tracing these transactions revealed that they were being funneled into an offshore account registered to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. The audit report was damning. The irregularities amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars over the course of several months, a sum that could easily be hidden in the shadow of a large corporation's finances. The report also mentioned that these funds had been approved by someone with significant authority, someone whose initials, RT, appeared on the digital signatures. Coincidentally, those were the initials of Richard Thompson. As more evidence emerged, Detective Alvarez learned that Devon had been in contact with a trusted auditor named Sylvia Jones, who had worked with the corporation for over a decade. Sylvia recalled that Devon had confided in her about discrepancies in the end-of-day cash registers. He was insistent that something wasn't right, Sylvia said, her voice low. He even showed me copies of bank transfer records that didn't match the store's sales figures. He thought there was a cover-up. Sylvia had also mentioned that Devon had hinted at a meeting between senior management and an unidentified party from the offshore firm. The thought that Devon's own investigation might have been seen as a threat was chilling. As the investigation unfolded, Detective Alvarez began receiving anonymous tips. One tipster, who called himself Viper, claimed to have witnessed a clandestine meeting in the store's parking garage the night before Devon's death. According to Viper, a man in a dark suit and another in a business suit were seen exchanging envelopes near a row of parked cars. The parking garage, a sprawling, poorly lit structure beneath the store, had long been a haven for the city's transient population, but it had never been a focus of police attention until now. Surveillance footage from the garage was grainy, but showed a figure whose gait and posture matched that of a known associate of Richard Thompson, a man with a reputation for handling issues discreetly. The anonymous tips and the mounting evidence began to suggest that Devon's murder was not a random act of violence, but a calculated move orchestrated by individuals who wished to keep their financial misdeeds hidden. The investigation took on a new urgency when forensic teams discovered traces of a rare chemical residue on a broken piece of plastic near Devon's body, a residue typically found in industrial-grade cleaning solvents used in financial institutions to wipe down sensitive equipment. This detail was peculiar. It suggested that the perpetrators had taken steps to erase physical evidence in a manner that was both precise and chillingly systematic. Detective Alvarez's team expanded the inquiry to include interviews with former employees and even disgruntled suppliers who had had minor disputes with the store in recent years. One such supplier, a small produce vendor named Carlos Mendoza, recalled that during a routine delivery, he had overheard a heated conversation in the manager's office about cutting losses and adjusting the books. Mendoza, who had been doing business with the store for over a decade, had no reason to expect such malfeasance from a trusted partner. His account lent further credence to the theory that something significant was amiss behind the polished storefront of Urban Harvest Market. In a breakthrough moment, the cyber unit managed to trace one of the encrypted emails back to an IP address located in the downtown financial district. The email, sent just hours before Devon's death, contained a chilling message: "We will silence the whisperer." This discovery set off a race against time. Detective Alvarez and her team canvassed the area near the financial district, interviewing local businesses and tracking digital footprints that might lead to the mysterious sender. Their efforts uncovered that the IP address was associated with a high-end office building, a building known to house several corporate law firms and financial consultancies that worked closely with the store's parent company. Further digging into the digital evidence revealed a pattern. Multiple emails from the same source referenced a final meeting and a closure of accounts. These emails, while cryptic, implied that the orchestrators of the scheme had planned not only to cover up their misappropriations but also to ensure that anyone who got too close would be permanently removed from the equation. The language was chillingly methodical, almost as if it were written by someone who had rehearsed this outcome countless times. Detective Alvarez's breakthrough came when she managed to secure a meeting with Sylvia Jones, the long-trusted auditor. In the dim light of a small conference room at the firm's modest offices, Sylvia revealed that she had noticed an irregularity in the numbers that had been flagged by Devon's internal report. It wasn't just small discrepancies, Sylvia explained. There were whole sums of money that simply vanished, reappearing in obscure accounts. I believed it was an elaborate system of misdirection. Devon was on the verge of putting it all together, and that must have frightened someone. Sylvia hesitated before adding, "I'm not saying I had anything to do with it, but I know how powerful people can be when their secrets are threatened." As the layers of the case peeled back, it became increasingly clear that Richard Thompson, the esteemed figurehead of Urban Harvest Market, was at the center of the controversy. Thompson's outward persona as a community benefactor masked a ruthless approach to business. Internal emails, discovered during the search of his private office, revealed heated discussions about maximizing margins and ensuring no loose ends. In one email, addressed to a senior colleague, Thompson had written, "If anyone jeopardizes our operations, they will be dealt with swiftly." The tone of the email was cold and unyielding, a stark contrast to the congenial public image he maintained. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Thompson's legal team issued a statement claiming that the irregular transactions were merely the result of aggressive but legal financial restructuring. They argued that the offshore transfers were part of a diversified investment strategy designed to protect the company from market volatility. Yet, as Detective Alvarez presented the forensic evidence, the internal audit reports, and the decrypted emails linking Thompson to the silence fee, the facade began to crumble. A few lower-level executives, fearing for their own safety, provided testimonies that implicated Thompson in pressuring the finance department to keep certain numbers hidden. One former manager tearfully admitted, "I was ordered to ignore discrepancies. We were told that silence was the price of success." His words, raw and unfiltered, underscored the sinister reality behind the corporate veneer. As the investigation approached its climax, a final disturbing twist emerged. In a routine check of the store's security system archives, files that had been scheduled for deletion due to outdated technology, Detective Alvarez uncovered a short video clip from the parking lot that had gone unnoticed. The footage showed a figure in a dark suit, face partially obscured by a baseball cap, approaching the back door of the market on the night of the murder. The figure paused, looked around cautiously, and then entered the building through a side entrance. When the security team later compared this image with the one from the maintenance area, they noticed a striking similarity. The same individual's distinctive gait and mannerisms were captured in both clips. Further analysis of the video revealed that this man had been seen in the vicinity of a nearby financial building earlier that same night, a building that housed offices for several firms implicated in the offshore transfers. The digital evidence, combined with witness accounts, pointed to the involvement of a professional fixer, a man whose sole purpose was to ensure that secrets remained buried, no matter the cost. The discovery of the fixer added a new dimension to the case. It was no longer simply a matter of internal corruption and financial mismanagement. It had escalated into a calculated act of violence designed to silence a lone whistleblower. Detective Alvarez's team traced the fixer's movements through a network of cell tower data and credit card transactions. They learned that he was known in criminal circles as Hawk, a nickname earned for his ability to swoop in and eliminate threats with surgical precision. Hawk's connections were murky, but his reputation was well established among those who dealt in underground operations. Although the team was unable to immediately apprehend him, the identification of Hawk provided a crucial link in understanding the full scope of the conspiracy. Over the following weeks, as the case dominated headlines and sent ripples through both the corporate world and local government, Detective Alvarez continued to build her case against the conspirators. Court warrants were issued, and a series of raids were conducted on offices affiliated with the investment firm and the parent company of Urban Harvest Market. The arrests included several mid-level managers and financial officers, and the recovered documents painted a picture of systematic fraud, money laundering, and a deliberate plan to cover up the discrepancies that Devin Carter had been investigating. Yet, despite these breakthroughs, the investigation left one major question unanswered: who had orchestrated the murder of Devin Carter, and was Hawk, the elusive fixer, merely a hired hand, or the mastermind behind the entire operation? In a tense confrontation at a nondescript police precinct in North Philadelphia, Detective Alvarez finally managed to secure a statement from a low-level associate of Hawk. Under the dim glow of a single overhead light, and with a heavy dose of pressure from federal agents, the associate, a jittery man with hollow eyes, revealed that Hawk had been contracted by a shadowy figure known only by the initials RT. The associate explained that RT was a high-ranking executive with deep political connections, and that he had personally ordered Hawk to clean up any threats to the company's financial interests. The revelation sent shockwaves through the investigation. The initials RT matched those found on several documents within the internal audit reports, and even appeared on one of the encrypted emails that had warned Devin Carter to back off. This connection placed the ultimate responsibility for the murder squarely at the highest levels of the corporate hierarchy. By the time the case reached the courtroom, the sprawling nature of the conspiracy was impossible to ignore. In a packed trial that drew media from across the region, prosecutors laid out a narrative that spanned months of covert meetings, encrypted communications, and meticulously orchestrated financial transfers. Detective Alvarez took the stand to recount her journey from the moment she discovered Devin Carter's body to the painstaking unraveling of a network designed to keep illicit funds hidden at all costs. Her testimony was bolstered by forensic evidence, financial audits, and witness statements that linked Richard Thompson, the senior management team, and ultimately the elusive RT to the elaborate cover-up. One of the most disturbing moments in the trial came when a forensic accountant detailed how the silence fee was not only a euphemism for bribery, but in at least one instance had been explicitly recorded in an internal memo as payment for permanent removal. The revelation that the conspirators had premeditated not just the misappropriation of funds, but the elimination of potential whistleblowers, added a layer of chilling certainty to the proceedings. Although several mid-level operatives received lengthy prison sentences, the charges against the top executives were ultimately reduced on a technicality, leaving the identity of RT officially unpunished, a loophole that many in the courtroom found infuriating. Even as the verdicts were delivered, and headlines celebrated a partial victory for justice, Detective Alvarez could not shake the sense of incompleteness that haunted the case. The fixer known as Hawk had vanished into the labyrinth of organized crime, and the true identity of RT remained a ghost among high society. In the days following the trial, anonymous letters began to appear at the precinct, a final unsettling message stating, "Some shadows never fade." Unlike many true crime cases that offer closure with a dramatic finality, this investigation ended with an unresolved tension, a stark reminder that the pursuit of truth in the murky realms of power and money is an endless struggle. In the weeks after the trial, Urban Harvest Market slowly reopened its doors to a community that now eyed the familiar aisles with a mix of wariness and sorrow. Shoppers moved through the store with hushed conversations, their everyday routines forever altered by the knowledge that beneath the veneer of ordinary commerce, forces beyond their control had been at work. For Detective Alvarez, each day was a new reminder of the case's enduring impact, a case that had exposed not only the greed and corruption festering in the heart of a respected institution, but also the terrible human cost of silence. Late one evening, as the rain pattered against the large front windows of her modest office, Detective Alvarez reviewed a final batch of digital files recovered during the investigation. Among them was a partially deleted email from an unknown sender that simply read, "Truth is fragile." The phrase, stark in its simplicity, encapsulated the entire ordeal. A single pursuit of integrity had led to a cascade of betrayal and violence, and even now, years later, the aftershocks were felt by all who had been touched by the case. In a rare moment of quiet resolve, Alvarez penned a brief note in her personal journal. There was no grand epilogue or heroic summation, only the simple acknowledgement that the journey to expose corruption was far from over. Every uncovered secret gave way to new questions, and the corridors of power, with all their hidden depths, would continue to harbor shadows that defied easy explanation. As Philadelphia pressed forward into another day, life in the city's bustling neighborhoods resumed its usual cadence. Urban Harvest Market became just another grocery store in a city that had seen too much to be completely surprised by the dark undercurrents that occasionally broke through its everyday facade. But for those who had witnessed the tragedy of Devin Carter's murder and the subsequent unraveling of a vast financial conspiracy, the memory lingered, a solemn reminder that in a world where money and power intertwine, even the most unassuming places can harbor secrets capable of destroying lives. Detective Renee Carter's work on the case, though marked by a bittersweet mix of success and unresolved loss, reinforced her unwavering commitment to seek out the truth, no matter how deeply it was buried. In the silent spaces between cases and in the quiet moments before dawn, she would often reflect on the events of that fateful night by the Schuylkill River, on the taste of bitter coffee as she pored over financial ledgers, and on the subtle digital footprints that had pointed to a conspiracy far larger than anyone had anticipated. There were no tidy resolutions in a battle against corruption, only the ongoing promise that every hidden truth would eventually be dragged into the light, if only someone was willing to look. For many in Philadelphia, the story of Devin Carter, Urban Harvest Market, and the intricate web of deceit that had led to his death became a quiet legend, passed on in cautious tones at community gatherings and in whispered conversations among those who had long been disillusioned by the machinery of power. It was a story that defied the neat closure of conventional true crime narratives, a story whose final chapters were still being written in the minds of those determined to never let silence reign. In the end, the case was not defined by its unanswered questions or by the gaps in the legal verdict, but by the relentless pursuit of truth that had driven a single man to his ultimate sacrifice and had in turn ignited a fire within an entire community. As the city continued its ceaseless dance between light and darkness, Detective Renee Carter kept her vigil, a steadfast guardian in a world where every shadow concealed a secret waiting to be exposed, and every step forward was tempered by the sobering realization that justice, though sometimes incomplete, was a cause worth fighting for. Late on a humid summer night in Chicago, the city's ceaseless hum seemed to pause for just a moment as a single neon sign flickered uncertainly above a busy fast food restaurant. The establishment, known to locals as Burger King's Corner, an unpretentious joint on the southwest side of the city, had always been a haven of familiarity. The sizzle of frying patties, the clatter of trays, the aroma of freshly cut fries, mingling with the distant rumble of passing traffic. Regular customers drifted in and out, exchanging pleasantries with staff who had worked there for years, their routines as reliable as the daily specials. But that night, an ordinary shift would shatter the veneer of everyday life and launch an investigation that would uncover a labyrinth of deceit and betrayal. It began at closing time, when the restaurant was nearly empty and the remaining staff were tidying up. Maria Gutierrez, a veteran cashier with gentle eyes and steady hands, was restocking napkins at the counter when she heard a soft thud coming from the employee break room. Curious and concerned, she pushed open the door, its squeak echoing in the quiet. Inside, amidst the usual clutter of discarded wrappers and half-empty soda cups, lay the body of Jordan Ellis, a respected assistant manager, known for his meticulous record-keeping and earnest dedication to his work. His eyes were wide open in a final, uncomprehending stare, and a thin trail of blood trickled down his temple onto the linoleum floor. Clutched in his hand was a crumpled scrap of paper bearing a single chilling message in hurried script: "Silence is fatal." Within minutes, police cars arrived, their flashing lights painting the parking lot in harsh, intermittent bursts. Detective Angela Morales, a seasoned investigator with the Chicago Police Department, took command of the scene. She crouched beside Jordan's motionless body, methodically observing every detail: the precise placement of his hands on the counter, the almost too clean arrangement of the nearby chairs, and the absence of any signs of a struggle. It was as if the killer had taken extraordinary care to stage the scene, a calculated act designed to send a message. Morales's steely gaze drifted over the scattered evidence. There was nothing immediately missing from the room, yet the note in Jordan's hand hinted at an underlying truth that someone desperately wanted to keep hidden. As the forensic team cordoned off the area and began collecting samples, Morales started interviewing the few employees who had been on duty that night. Maria recounted how earlier in the shift, Jordan had been unusually tense. He was double-checking the cash registers and looking over the day's sales figures with an intensity I hadn't seen before. Maria explained, her voice shaking slightly. "I thought maybe he was just tired, but now, I don't know." Another employee, Darren Simmons, a young man working the fry station, mentioned that Jordan had spent several minutes alone in his office before closing, scribbling furiously in a small notebook. "He said something about numbers not adding up, and that he needed to fix it," Darren recalled. "I assumed he was just worried about work, but now I'm not so sure." Over the following hours, Detective Morales and her team combed through the break room and Jordan's private office at the back of the restaurant. Inside a battered desk drawer, they discovered a slim notebook with neat handwriting that belied the chaos of the evening. Page after page contained meticulous notes about daily cash discrepancies, unapproved discounts, and unusual financial transfers that had cropped up over the past few weeks. One entry, dated just a week earlier, read, "Total sales don't match deposits. Check account 389B. Something is off." Another page listed a series of amounts circled repeatedly, with a final note scrawled in the margin: "If these figures come to light, they'll ruin us all." The implication was clear. Jordan had uncovered evidence of financial irregularities that threatened to expose a serious internal fraud. Urban fast food establishments were rarely the stage for violent crime, but as Morales dug deeper into Jordan's work records, she began to suspect that this case was far from ordinary. Internal audits of Burger King's Corner, obtained with the cooperation of a reluctant regional manager, revealed a troubling pattern. Large sums of money, often in amounts that seemed insignificant on a daily basis, had been siphoned off into accounts that did not appear on any official ledger. The money was disappearing systematically, month after month, hidden behind technical accounting jargon and obscure budget transfers. No one in the staff had ever questioned it openly. After all, the restaurant was a small operation in a competitive industry, and every dollar counted. But Jordan had been the one to notice the discrepancies. His detailed notes now suggested that someone within management had been redirecting funds for reasons unknown, and that those funds could have been used to pay off competitors, launder money, or even finance more sinister endeavors. The investigation took an unsettling turn when digital forensic specialists recovered encrypted emails from Jordan's work computer. With painstaking care, they decrypted portions of the correspondence. One email, sent from an anonymous account, warned stop digging or face the consequences. Another message referred ominously to a final meeting scheduled for the day before his death. The tone was stark, almost clinical, and hinted at a conspiracy that extended beyond petty embezzlement. It appeared that Jordan's discoveries had upset someone powerful, someone who would not hesitate to silence him permanently. Detective Morales began to compile a list of persons of interest. The focus naturally fell on the restaurant's management. Burger King's Corner was owned by a regional franchise group known as City Eats, a company with a reputation for aggressive cost-cutting and tight financial controls. The regional manager, Kenneth Miller, was a man in his 50s with a well-rehearsed smile and a reputation for quelling internal disputes swiftly. When questioned by Morales, Miller expressed shock at Jordan's death and insisted that all financial procedures at the restaurant were strictly in line with company policy. Yet Morales noted subtle inconsistencies in his statements, a pause here, a flicker of something unspoken there. More revealing was the fact that Miller's own financial records, accessed through a subpoena, showed unexplained entries and transfers that aligned disturbingly well with the irregularities documented in Jordan's notebook. In parallel, Morales interviewed the franchise owner, a businessman named William Carter, no relation to the victim, who prided himself on the profitability of his outlets. Carter's demeanor was cool and businesslike, but his eyes betrayed a hint of defensiveness when questioned about the missing funds. "I run a tight ship," he stated, his tone measured. "I don't condone any irregularities. Every cent is accounted for." Yet behind the veneer of corporate efficiency, Morales discovered that Carter had recently authorized a series of cash transfers to a shell company based in the Cayman Islands, a move that had been explained away as part of a routine investment strategy. The numbers, however, did not add up, and they matched the amounts Jordan had flagged. As the investigation advanced, Detective Morales began to uncover a network of deception that extended well beyond the confines of a single fast food restaurant. Rumors among local business circles suggested that City Eats, the parent company, had been involved in broader financial schemes, arrangements that allowed them to pocket millions while maintaining the outward appearance of profitability. One former accountant, who spoke on the condition of anonymity, revealed that he had once been pressured to adjust the books and to overlook certain discrepancies in order to meet quarterly targets. "They were willing to do anything to keep the numbers looking good," he confided. "I never imagined it would come to murder." The case took a disturbing twist when an anonymous tip led Morales to a nondescript parking garage adjacent to the restaurant. In the dim light of the garage, the uniformed officer who responded found a discarded cell phone partially hidden behind a stack of old shopping carts. Forensic analysis of the phone revealed deleted text messages that had not been entirely erased. One fragment of a message warned, "You're playing a dangerous game, stop now or it will be your last." The chilling tone of the message reinforced the theory that Jordan's investigation had triggered a lethal response from someone determined to maintain a clandestine financial network. Every new discovery deepened the sense of foreboding. Detective Morales noticed that despite the relatively low profile of Burger King's Corner, the case was starting to attract attention from higher levels of law enforcement and even local media. A seasoned investigative reporter from a major newspaper, Cynthia Harper, reached out to the department with questions about the missing funds and the unusual security camera footage from the parking garage. Harper had a reputation for exposing corruption in unexpected places, and her inquiries only lent further weight to the notion that something far larger was at play. Late one night, as Morales pored over a stack of financial records in her modest office in the police precinct, she received a call from a source claiming to be a former employee of City Eats. The voice on the other end was hoarse with fear. "You don't know how deep this goes," the caller whispered. "Jordan was on to something big, something that involves more than just our local store. They have people in places you'd never imagine. You need to be careful." The warning sent shivers down Morales' spine, but it also reinforced her resolve to push forward, no matter how dangerous the truth might be. The investigation began to focus on the connection between the irregular financial transfers and a network of shell companies. With the help of federal financial investigators, Morales traced a series of transfers from City Eats accounts to a Cayman Islands firm known as Oceanic Investments. The amounts were modest on a daily basis, but over the course of several months they added up to a substantial sum. Oceanic Investments was registered to a firm that specialized in offshore asset management, a common tool for multinational corporations, but in this case, the transfers were uncomfortably consistent with the discrepancies that Jordan had documented. A forensic accountant testified that the pattern of transactions was too deliberate to be a mere error in bookkeeping. It was instead the signature of systematic fraud. Meanwhile, the physical evidence began to yield its own disturbing clues. The piece of paper clutched in Jordan's hand had been subjected to painstaking forensic analysis. The handwriting was erratic, as if scrawled in a rush, but a comparison with known samples from various employees eventually revealed that it matched the handwriting of an individual who had once worked in the finance department, a mid-level manager named Anthony Russo. Anthony, who had since been reassigned to a lower-profile position, had maintained a reputation for diligence, but Morales' investigation uncovered that he had been at odds with senior management over the questionable transfers. When questioned by the detective, Russo became visibly agitated. "I did what I had to do to keep things in order," he insisted. "Sometimes, tough choices have to be made in business. I never meant any harm." His explanation, laden with a cold pragmatism, did little to quell Morales' suspicions that he might have been involved in silencing Jordan. As the layers of the case continued to build, Morales began to piece together a narrative of corporate treachery, where financial mismanagement was not the only crime. Jordan's meticulous notebook, the encrypted emails, the anonymous texts, and the physical evidence all converged on a disturbing truth. Someone within the upper echelons of City Eats was determined to keep their illicit operations hidden, even if it meant resorting to murder. The final twist came when federal agents uncovered a confidential memo during a raid on one of the company's secondary offices. The memo, dated just days before Jordan's death, discussed risk mitigation and preventative measures in a context that made it clear the authors were willing to go to any lengths to protect their financial interests. It concluded with the chilling statement, "Any leak must be neutralized permanently." That sentence, stark and unambiguous, resonated with every piece of evidence Morales had gathered. Detective Angela Morales presented her findings in a series of closed-door briefings with her superiors and eventually to a grand jury. The evidence pointed decisively toward a conspiracy involving senior management at City Eats, with Richard Thompson, the regional manager, at its helm, and with Anthony Russo implicated as the executor of a plan to silence a whistleblower. The grand jury indicted several individuals on charges ranging from fraud and embezzlement to conspiracy and ultimately, accessory to murder. The legal battle that ensued was complex and protracted, as defense attorneys argued that the irregular transactions were a byproduct of aggressive corporate restructuring and that any financial discrepancies were unintentional. But the overwhelming combination of forensic evidence, internal audit reports, and eyewitness testimony painted a damning picture. In the courtroom, the prosecution's star witness was a forensic accountant whose testimony detailed the precise pattern of the transfers, each one a deliberate move designed to siphon funds away from the company's official accounts and into secret offshore repositories. When asked if he believed the transfers were part of a larger scheme, he replied without hesitation, The numbers tell a story of deliberate fraud. It's not just mismanagement, it's organized embezzlement. His words, delivered in a monotone that belied the gravity of his findings, sent ripples through the courtroom. Meanwhile, testimony from a whistleblower, who had once worked in the finance department, described the culture of fear that had permeated the office. "We were told that if we questioned the numbers, we'd end up like that poor man," the witness said quietly, his eyes downcast as he recounted the fate of Jordan Ellis. The courtroom fell silent as the full weight of the allegations settled over everyone present. Despite the compelling evidence, the trial did not yield the kind of cathartic closure that one might hope for. While several mid-level managers and a few high-ranking executives were convicted, the top echelons of City Eats managed to avoid the harshest penalties by invoking legal technicalities and leveraging their considerable influence. Richard Thompson, the regional manager, whose signature had appeared on many of the questionable transfers, was sentenced to a lengthy prison term for fraud and conspiracy, but he maintained his innocence throughout, insisting that he had been merely following orders from higher up. Anthony Russo, implicated as the operative who had physically silenced the threat, received a lesser sentence after pleading guilty to accessory to murder. The notion that a corporate scandal of this magnitude could result in a neatly tied-up ending was a bitter pill for Detective Morales. The evidence suggested that the corruption was systemic and that many of the true architects of the scheme would remain at large. In the aftermath of the trial, Urban Harvest Market reopened its doors to a community still reeling from the shock. The familiar buzz of conversation in the aisles was tinged with an undercurrent of wariness. Shoppers who had once taken comfort in the routine of their daily purchases now exchanged cautious glances, aware that behind every well-stocked shelf there might be hidden stories of greed and betrayal. For Detective Angela Morales, the case left an indelible mark, a reminder that in the world of corporate finance and everyday commerce, the pursuit of truth is a relentless endeavor, one that rarely offers neat endings. Late one rainy night several months after the trial, as Morales sat alone in her modest office reviewing a final batch of digital files recovered during the investigation, she came across one last piece of evidence that had not been fully explained. In an encrypted folder on Jordan Ellis's old computer, she found a nearly complete draft of an email addressed to an unknown recipient. The message was a stark warning: if the numbers start speaking, then silence will follow. It was as if the sender had foreseen the chain of events that would lead to Jordan's murder and had tried to warn him, though perhaps too late. Morales stared at the screen, a chill running through her. There were no names, no clear indications of who was behind it, only the quiet certainty that the system of corruption was far from over. There was no grand epilogue to this case, a neat summing up where every question was answered and every loose end tied. Instead, the investigation ended with an ambiguous truth that the pursuit of justice had uncovered a network of deceit so vast that even a successful trial could only scratch the surface. In a final briefing with her colleagues, Morales spoke softly: "We've done all we can here, but I can't shake the feeling that there's more hidden out there. More secrets waiting in the shadows of everyday life." Her words resonated with the team, many of whom had seen firsthand how seemingly ordinary places, a fast food restaurant, a grocery store, even a parking garage, could hide stories of unimaginable betrayal and violence. In the days and years that followed, the case of Jordan Ellis became a subject of discussion among investigators, journalists, and even in academic circles analyzing corporate corruption. It spurred internal reforms at City Eats and led to tighter controls on financial transactions at several regional businesses. Yet for many, the memory of that rainy night in Chicago remained a somber reminder that the systems we trust to serve us are not immune to manipulation by those driven by greed. Detective Morales continued her work with a steady determination, her every case a reminder that truth is often obscured by layers of bureaucracy and fear. On one particularly cold evening, as she walked along a busy Chicago sidewalk under the glow of street lamps, Morales paused for a moment. The city's relentless energy, its honking horns, chattering crowds, and flickering neon signs, seemed to mock the quiet tragedies that unfolded in its hidden corners. In that moment, she reflected on the events that had led to Jordan's death. A dedicated man who had tried to expose a secret so dangerous that it cost him his life. A fast food restaurant that had become an unwitting stage for corporate misdeeds. and a network of individuals who would do anything to keep their illicit gains hidden. The mystery would never be fully resolved. Some pieces of the puzzle remained in the dark, unclaimed by the light of justice. Yet for Morales, that was the reality of her world, a constant, unending quest to uncover truth, even when it meant confronting the chilling possibility that some secrets are too deeply entrenched to ever be completely eradicated. There was no neat closure, no triumphant final chapter to the story of Jordan Ellis and the corruption at Urban Harvest Market. Instead, the case lingered like a specter over the city, a constant reminder that beneath the everyday hustle of commerce and the comforting routines of daily life, there exist hidden narratives of betrayal and violence that can shatter the most ordinary of worlds. Detective Angela Morales continued to work each day with the same unwavering dedication, knowing that every time she looked beyond the familiar facade of a neighborhood store or a bustling restaurant, she might uncover another chapter in the never-ending saga of human greed and the relentless pursuit of truth. And so in the heart of Chicago, a city defined by its resilience and its unyielding spirit, the memory of that humid summer night endured. It was etched into the collective consciousness of those who had lived through it, whispered about in cautious tones in small kitchens and bustling diners, and studied by future generations as a lesson in the dark interplay between power, money, and the price of silence. Detective Morales' journey was far from over. With each new case she carried with her the hard-earned wisdom that while justice may sometimes be partial, the quest for truth is what ultimately defines the integrity of our institutions and our communities.